Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Thank you for joining us for this conversation.
And here we are. We are having story time. It's story time here on ITSP Magazine, and it's their story with our good friends at HITRUST. And a lot of folks might ask the question, who is HITRUST? And if they figure that out, they might then ask the question, well, why? Why HITRUST? And that's the question we're going to answer today in this story. There's a lot to keeping a security posture in check and meeting requirements around internal policies and regulatory policies and mapping to standards. And there's a lot that goes on to keeping businesses running safely and secure. And HITRUST has a huge hand in helping companies and their teams make that possible. And I don't know enough about it. The guys on the show know all about this, and we're going to hear from them. I'm first going to introduce Michael Parisi. He's the VP of Adoption at HITRUST. Michael, it's always good to have you on. Maybe a few words about what you do, and then pass the ball to Mike and John.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sean. No, appreciate being here today for today's story. So, as you mentioned, Vice President of Adoption here at HITRUST. You know, what HITRUST is we are a standards organization that's focused on enterprise risk management. And we look to arm the community with a number of different solutions and tools and programs to help them manage risk more efficiently and more effectively, whether that's internally within their own organizations or externally with their stakeholders. I'm joined by two esteemed colleagues of mine and longtime friends. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Mike, I'll hand it to you first.
Great. Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Sean. Glad to be here today. My name is Michael Tiemeyer. Mike Tiemeyer, I go by. I'm with Teledoc Health. I'm the Vice President of Risk and Compliance. We're a New York-based company, but we're really a global company, and we have people all over, I think on 6 continents right now. We provide really a lifestyle company with devices and services for telemedicine. We have both high acuity products, low acuity products. Our company's the sort of the product of multiple acquisitions as part of our growth strategy, purchasing both Livongo and InTouch Health last year, and really rounding out our product portfolio to bring patients and doctors together and devices that allow for telemedicine and a better living.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And John?
Thanks, Michael, and Sean. It's good to be with you, and with Mike as well. My name is John Overbaugh. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Alpine Software Group. So we are kind of an investment group, but really what we do is we give founders of vertical SaaS solutions the opportunity to engage with us to develop capital and grow their business with support of from our leadership, both from a business and an IT perspective.
Nice one. And clearly, well, maybe not clearly for everybody, but from my perspective, both of your organizations are in the business of driving innovation to do some important things for people and society. And there's nothing more important to us as humans as our health. Now, John, you probably cover many vertical sectors. Yep. Mike, you're directly involved in healthcare. The point is, we're driving technology right to the edge in many cases. And with that comes exposure and with risk. And I'd like to get your view first from both of you, kind of in through the lens of your role at your prospective organizations. How do you enable business growth and innovation and digital transformation while also embracing the realities that you have exposure and you have risk that you need to manage. So how do you balance that? And Mike, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, the balance is really important. It is, as I mentioned earlier, we're many companies coming together as one. So that maturity journey is very, 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 very important to us. We look at risk assessment, solid risk assessment, getting a good understanding of what our roadmap is and what the risks are to that. So building out that risk and control framework is important. But what we did is we found HITRUST was a very, very good framework. I mean, a company could bring in a Deloitte or any of the one of the big firms to source a solution for them. We found that the HITRUST framework, because it allowed us to really build that, do it ourselves, and then have continuous monitoring of that to ensure that we're living up to those standards on a regular basis. And so, having that vision, managing the risk, mapping our risk framework to the HITRUST requirements, we found was very, very effective to us. We're currently right now in the middle, right smack in the middle of our merging all of our companies under one HITRUST 9.4, and it is really acting as a galvanizing force to help mitigate those risks and mature our company overall. So it's working quite well.
John, same to you.
Yeah, I think, what I always tell founders as well as leaders is it's just as easy to develop a secure company and a secure solution as it is to develop an insecure one. You just need some tools, some process, and some skills. And I look to HITRUST to help us with both those, the process and the skill set that we need, and some guidance around the tools as well. What I like about it is it's a consistent framework that can be leveraged across multiple organizations. And at the same time, it's right-sized for the size and the scope of the organization. So it allows large companies and small companies to bring the appropriate amount of security to bear based on their size, as well as the number of records that they have and other contributing factors to their risk.
And Michael, you see a wide swath of all things in business and in security and risk management. I mean, every organization is innovating, whether it's a coffee shop trying to deliver the best experience to their coffee lovers, or if it's a multinational healthcare provider, insurer, payer conglomerate, right? That has a lot going on there. How do you see organizations leveraging HITRUST to actually enable innovation and enable growth versus the traditional model of risk management, which is don't do that, that's going to burn you?
Yeah. So I think a lot of organizations are using it as a differentiator, right, within the marketplace. Now, there are certainly some stakeholders that are asking and requiring assurances, right? And when you think about this concept of being able to be transparent from an organizational perspective, that's important to organizations that adopt and go down the HITRUST path, such as Mike with Teladoc and John with Alpine. It's important to be transparent relative to your program maturity and posture. You don't want to try and hide anything, right? You want to be proud of what you're doing relative to that innovation and embedding it within the foundation of what you're offering in terms of services and products for sure. But more importantly, when we think about some of the industries that we're operating within, especially healthcare, I mean, the greatest risk is the risk of human life being lost, right? So making sure that the solutions that organizations like Teladoc, Alpine, their portfolio companies are providing, it can't get more important than that, right? So they're leveraging HITRUST as a differentiator, not only relative to winning additional business partners, but relative to how they view the importance of protecting sensitive information and how that helps to address and minimize a series of risks, right, that those solutions could introduce into the marketplace.
If I can kind of jump on that, I've been engaged with HITRUST since about 2012, and through a number of organizations. And in each instance, as organizations have achieved HITRUST certification, that becomes almost a selling point right? It's an endorsement from a recognized third-party organization that really contributes to the reputation and the brand of the company that achieves that certification. And I think that's as helpful in many cases as the actual effort and the work to that we go through to be certified.
Yeah, I'll add on if I could, Sean. What I would say is, we do, obviously, being a large company with, a global company, there's lots of RFPs that come our way, right? We have a hospital and healthcare systems group, and those RFPs, we have an entire team that works in those that can be very, very onerous. Believe me, they are always, can give me the latest HITRUST certification. How are we doing on HITRUST? Because they realize that during an RFP, we may have to turn in 400 documents to prove our worthiness, or we turn in a one-page document that says that we're HITRUST certified. And that HITRUST certified is now, to the point, is actually written into contracts, and it carries a lot of weight out there. And so, we look at that as being very much part of our business strategy to be HITRUST certified, and it certainly saves us, we think, a lot of time, money, and effort by having that distinct and very prestigious, because it has been, I think, really recognized in the industry because there is so much rigor to it. And it does cover so much to what Michael was saying. It covers such a wide swath of the 19 control domains that are there, that they know that everything's been looked at and there are no dark shadows or places to hide. It's all transparent and it's out there.
That's right.
And I definitely want to get into the transparency and the level of trust that comes with this as well. But before we do that, I want to get back to the beginning, because what we're saying sounds lovely, and we're gonna expand upon the value and the benefits of being HITRUST certified. Was that your original vision when you embarked? And John, you have multiple experiences. Mike, I'm interested in your history and path and journey. But what was the original vision? Was it to differentiate or grow the business, or was it just because somebody said you had to be HITRUST certified? What was it?
I think it's a combination of several things. So across the years, as we've worked with organizations, one benefit that we noticed with HITRUST is it is a common security framework. That's what they call it, common security framework. It's a framework that helps me get compliance, but at the same time security, because we all know the two can be mutually exclusive. It's also a bar to measure ourselves by. So as an organization, there's a couple of tacks we can take on security. One is to just kind of randomly throw some controls out there that we're going to go for and hope we get good coverage. One is to go look through all of the variety of control frameworks out there and try to select and right size the framework to what we need to do. And then finally, we can turn to HITRUST. They've done that deep thinking. First of all, they've brought HIPAA together with other common control frameworks, such as ISO 27001 and 2, the NIST CSF, and so forth. So what I've always liked about HITRUST is that rationalization has taken place for me already. Next, when I go through the scoping exercise, it takes care of all those scoping decisions on our behalf. Now, we can always go back and justify changes to the scoping and add in controls if we feel they're necessary. But what's nice is that it's customized for us by a third party who's already done that thought leadership. And so therefore that tailoring is recognized by other bodies, including our customers. So it's an efficient way to get to a good control set that's appropriate for my company's size and risk. And then finally, it isn't just an arbitrary list of controls. There's a lot of guidance included in the Common Security Framework, which helps when we're implementing controls and when we're doing internal evaluations of our controls. It's very clear whether or not a control is going to pass the requirements. I like to I work a lot in the agile world. We talk about definition of done, which gives clarity on, okay, we're finished. And that's what I think the HITRUST framework gives me, is that definition of done for my control set. Finally, what I like is I can wrap all of that up, and I know that my customers understand what I've done. And so really, Sean, our motivation both as a consultant with clients as well as a leader in various businesses, the motivations are multiple. But really, it comes down to having a good, clear framework, having a framework that's right-sized to my organization, and having a certification that's recognized by my clients and provides value to them and value to us from a sales and marketing perspective.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I think where our journey is, again, being the company that's a product of multiple acquisitions, depending what legacy company that we're talking with. I think initially it was done in some of the legacy companies because there was a customer expectation. As we have grown, as we're now merging and becoming what we call a one Teladoc company, as opposed to these siloed companies that are out there, it has been a fantastic experience for me to use this as a galvanizing force to really bring our company together in a really meaningful way. When you look at things like the policy and procedure, a lot of people, I think there's a misconception for some folks who are just, companies who are just getting into HITRUST, that this is an information security program. It's really anything but. It is a cultural transformation program of your entire company. There are 19 domains. It involves InfoSec and IT, of course, but a lot of people don't realize it involves HR, training, facilities, quality control. You've got your compliance organization, your risk, your tax organization, BCDR, legal. I mean, there are so many work streams where it touches. It really does bring the entire company together, and then goes, as John said, it's that common security framework, CSF. It really acts as that galvanizing force for us to become one company. This was HITRUST was a major driver for us taking all the legacy companies and ensuring that we didn't have siloed policies and procedures. A lot of people entering HITRUST don't realize that policies and procedures are a huge part of your scoring, not just the implementation piece of it. So bringing those together, this acted as a catalyst for having a single platform for policies and procedures, and really integrating those to ensure they had all of the HITRUST components in there, and not just bringing them into our policies and procedures, but having the implementation part of it as well.
Yeah, and Sean, if I can add on to that, I think Mike's comments and John's comments are in line with the true spirit of the programs that we have in place. There are certainly use cases where some organizations decide to go down the HITRUST path because they're contractually required, right? Or somebody asks them to do that. However, I think organizations that do that are missing out on the intrinsic value of the adoption cycle from a program perspective. And that includes things that Mike and John were talking about, right? I think it instills a sense of ownership across the organization relative to information security, of course, data, but also how seriously the organization takes collaboration on initiatives.
Yep.
Right. So if we bring it back to the people, right, it really helps to instill that. It's a catalyst. I think to some of Mike's comments, there's no avoiding it. Right. When we think about all these compliance and security activities, as John mentioned, that he's seen for so many years, many organizations try and silo those and say, oh, well, that's the privacy office's responsibility, or that's the information security responsibility, or maybe it's legal or procurement. But the way that we've structured the programs say that's not reality. Right. If you're not working together as a group across all of those silos, breaking down those walls, then do you really have a true sense of ownership from an organizational perspective? Which is ultimately what's going to help the ecosystem, right? So that's the true spirit of the programs. Also, I would tell you, remember, before me coming here, I've been here about 4.5 years, 22 years in professional services, right? All big four. What I've seen is that organizations fail to recognize the ability to rationalize how much they're doing as it relates to security and privacy, right? Okay. Yeah. When you look at all these standalone audit efforts that are out there, and we have so much audit fatigue, it's so expensive, and not only in terms of dollars, but in terms of time, that it's taking away from our strongest, most important people within our organizations. Right? They have to take their eye off the ball in delivering value and delivering, to bring it back to the beginning, as you said, the innovative services, right, that we're trying to bring to market. So how do you use something like HITRUST to minimize the impact that that's having on your stakeholders holistically across the organization? That's really the value, right? Let's rationalize where we're spending our time, at the same time being responsive at the highest level from a transparency perspective to our stakeholders.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that if I could, Sean, is that It's interesting to see where HITRUST is falling in organizations. Like I said, something that would plop on the CIO or the CISO's desk. I sit in legal and I run risk and compliance. And so, you're finding that because it really broadens such a wide area that it covers. And I always say to people, you don't become HITRUST, you don't become HITRUST certified, you really become a HITRUST company. And that's really the way I think people have to look at it. And, overall, we also find that we are, as a company, are pursuing FedRAMP. FedRAMP is a big deal. And obviously we're ISO 27001. Obviously doing this work because there's so much similarity, and if you did a Venn diagram, they'd overlap very nicely. We find that HITRUST is the leader, and acts as the catalyst for us to ready ourselves for those other audits and certifications as well, and we repurpose those throughout the cycle.
Yeah.
And I want to take this opportunity because and as we were preparing for this, John, we touched on this idea of that there are things that organizations, let's bring it back to the innovation. Mm-hmm. There are things businesses do. They, regardless of what it is, they're building something, either a product or a service. Mm-hmm. And you just talked about being agile and knowing when you're done. Mm-hmm. Companies rally multiple teams to build those things, and those things have support from other parts of the organization. If you're going to sell something, you have to have a contract, so you need legal, right? If you're going to support it, you have to have systems and tools to enable customer service. Yeah, there's a whole infrastructure within the business to support whatever it is you're building. You don't leave parts out, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't just ship stuff without quality. And when you're all engaged, working toward a common goal, people feel excited when you reach that end, when you're done, as you said, John. Yep. So talk to me a little bit about how you relate a HITRUST program in the context of something organizations might recognize more freely in terms of like a product delivery.
I think it's very similar. I mean, I've been building software since 1995, right? And there are big pushes when you build a software application, right? There are times where it's a lot of work. And, no one's going to hide the fact on this call that the bar that's set with HITRUST is appropriately high. And it does take, as Mike has mentioned, it takes cross-organizational support and effort to get it done. But that payoff is fantastic, right? So when that letter of certification shows up, and as the HITRUST point of contact, CISO or privacy officer, or risk officer, whoever it is, when you get to forward that off to the leadership team in your organization and say, we did it, we've hit that bar, we've earned our certification, that's a great feeling, and see that go across the whole company. Everything worth anything requires a significant amount of effort, I would say, but it's worth it in the end.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, getting that certification, because it does take a lot of work. It is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of work to do. I mean, we have 500 requirements, 72 controlled in areas, and 19 don't. It's a lot of work to ensure that we have, that we're operating a high degree of efficiency there. But with that, because of that, once that's accomplished, and you do, to John's point, you because it was everybody in the company, you let them know that there is a major sense of accomplishment, and a lot of high fives, virtual and in person. Not in the last 2 years of COVID, but virtual high fives were going on. So which is great.
And I want to use this opportunity, Michael, to talk about, I think John used the word right-sized, because there is a level of effort, and depending on the size of your organization and the exposure you have, the risk you have in terms of how many records you hold, you want to protect, or systems that are critical that need securing. Whatever is the right scope should be the scope, and the quality around that scope shouldn't change, but the scope changes, right? And so I'm wondering, I know at HITRUST, you've put a scalable, I'm probably not going to describe it properly, but a scalable program in place such that organizations along their journey can grow and reach higher levels of certification, mapped better to their their risk level, their risk tolerance, and requirements from a security posture perspective. So
Yeah.
I'm probably botching that completely. So that's why I'm going to hand the ball to you now to kind of describe what you offer to help find that right-sized model.
Oh, you didn't botch it totally. That's pretty good. I mean, so it goes back to the journey, right? The concept of the journey. So the journey of transforming an organization, the journey of maturing programs over time, right? When you think about some of the organizations like John is working with, you know, a lot of them are startups, right? And they have a great idea with an innovative solution, and oftentimes having a good security and privacy program is not the first thing on their list, and for a number of different reasons, right? They're focused on getting their solution built and out to the marketplace. So what we've really done with our assurance portfolio, or our assurance continuum, right, as you're speaking about it, Sean, is to design really some new mechanisms to allow organizations to have an assurance platform, in which would result in a report that aligns to the level of risk that they introduce to their stakeholders. Traditionally, we've been what I would say is a one-trick pony, right? We've got the highest bar in the marketplace, I could have alluded, which result in a significant emotional event to go through that, right? But the market's been asking us for quite some time to say, look, not all organizations are created equal. Not all offerings are created equal. So if you can figure out a way to align the required level of assurance I need to provide to stakeholders to the level of inherent risk I introduce, wow, you would nail it, right? So one of the things that we worked on over the last several months, with feedback from our stakeholders and our partners like John, like Mike, is to say, if you could right size those assurance mechanisms driven off of risk, then you would have so much more adoption and better use cases from an organizational perspective. So, for example, for those listeners that may not have seen some of our most recent releases around the expansion of our assurance portfolio, you know, we've introduced a new certification that we refer to as the I1, right? That's a lighter lift in terms of the level of effort than our traditional certification that is now named the R2, but it has its place, right, within the ecosystem, because it still provides high levels of assurance, but maybe the scope, to your point, has been scaled down to what's most relevant for those organizations. And the same thing with our basic assessment. The other thing that we've done when you speak to right sizing it, you know, there's not only right sizing it relative to the risk, there's right sizing it relative to what you need to provide insight over. For example, maybe the most important relevant thing, if we're looking at a relationship with an organization as a relying party, is to understand the cyber threats and risks first and foremost. You know, all these things around having good security and privacy programs, and do you have appropriate policies and procedures, and are you measuring and managing your program? That's all important. And those are all things that we want to know. But if you don't have MFA in place, or if you don't have controls in place to address ransomware and phishing, dead on arrival, right? As far as I'm concerned, in terms of working with that organization. So to get insight into not only how an organization has built their program, but probably first and foremost, how they're addressing relevant cyber threats is really important, especially in today's day and age. And so again, if you look at some of the assurance mechanisms that we've designed, which, you know, John, maybe I'll ask you to comment on this, because I know we've spent a lot of time looking into the structure and the design of the I1. That's what we've tried to do with the expansion of our portfolio.
And I was going to say, I want to steal the ball from you on that.
Yeah.
So I'm really passionate about this because, you know, look, healthcare is both at a kind of at a crossroads, right? One, there's a state of disaster in healthcare, right? Just the cost of healthcare is spiraling. And the way, especially Americans care for themselves, is in a sorry state. At the same time, we stand on the edge of this amazing technology and all of this opportunity. There is no way that we're going to solve these problems without those opportunities and those technologies. But as Michael mentioned, one of the challenges is a lot of the smaller startup companies where most of the innovation is taking place, they will struggle to get into a full HITRUST assessment and a full certification because maybe they haven't even been in business long enough. Their primary goal getting out of the gate was to prove their technology worked, not just in a lab environment, but with a customer and so forth. This is what I like about the I1, because the I1 allows companies to focus on security, kind of where the rubber hits the road, right? So less of an emphasis on process and procedure and documentation, much more of an emphasis on actual implementation, and not just tailored to the scope of the company, but also tailored to the current threat landscape. So as Michael mentioned, there'd be some conversations in that certification around, your ransomware protection and so forth. So this is what I love about it, because it's that enabler. As large organizations look to the smaller companies for that innovation, there is a fear, right? I can't bring this innovation in-house, or I can't trust them with my data if they don't hit this security bar, and they don't necessarily hit the HITRUST security bar yet. But yet with the I1, that's a right-sized opportunity, and that allows me as a stakeholder, when I'm looking to partner with someone, that allows me to understand, hey, these guys are at a pretty good point. And a third party has done that validation for me instead of, just an attestation or a questionnaire. So that's why I'm quite excited about the I1 and the effort and impact it'll have on the innovative companies that need that opportunity to have a kind of a step up first.
Yeah, John, I think I was quite struck by your comment when we last spoke. You referred to it as an on-ramp to HITRUST, which I thought was really, really appropriate way to do.
Yeah, that's a good point.
As a larger company, we look at the R2, right? So it's not something we want to go for the R2. Yep. It's right for us in our maturity level, and also because of our size, we don't want to be in this less a continuous cycle of getting that certification. But I think you're right to having companies who are doing great innovation and they need that. It is a great on-ramp to your point.
Yep. And to Michael's point, excuse me, to Michael's point earlier about the value beyond just getting the certification, that there is a process. And I want to talk to you, both of you and John and Mike, about what it feels like to go through the process of on-ramping, onboarding, and achieving that success. I think, Mike, you talked about the team being galvanized around the effort. So talk to me a little bit about the culture that comes with the process beyond that takes place before the actual certificate.
Yeah, I will. It's great. And so obviously I have to say the MyCSF tool, the HITRUST MyCSF tool, is fantastic. And we use that as our first basis. It really is the first thing we do. We scope everything out. We make sure that and then we get that output Excel sheet. And from that Excel sheet that said, these are your requirements. And we have give or take 500 requirements that are in there, as I mentioned, and 72 control families and the 19 domains that everyone would have. What we start to do is the first thing we start to do is we start to data model. Now, there's a very good rubric that's in there for scoring. And what I think a lot of people don't understand with HITRUST is based on an average score as opposed to getting 100% on everything. Obviously, we strive for 100% on everything. We want 100% everything, and that's what our goal is. But the ultimate score is there's a rubric there that allows you to pass, which means that you can have some highs and lows. So the first thing we do is using that rubric and really the maturity scale is we forecast what our current maturity is on every single requirement, all 500 of them. So we data model it, and then we look at where we need to raise the bar, and on all 500 of those, and we build a data model that shows what our passing score will be and figure out those averages there. From that point on, we build a plan. We pull all the work streams together, and I think I've got 14 work streams right now. I think it's 14 overall that are working on this and doing their part to. It's not just about pulling artifacts. It's really about ensuring that we've got the right policies, the right procedures, and are we implemented to a high degree of sophistication. And we project manage that out, and we report on it with full transparency to every stakeholder in the company. Every business leader gets that dashboard. It shows where we are on our journey. We have a glide path to make sure we're hitting all of our milestones. I love the fact that that HITRUST now has an audit window that you can reserve in advance. You didn't used to have that, which is great. And so that's all done. And we make sure that we measure and monitor every step of the way, and that there's good QC on those artifacts that are coming in, because obviously when you have your third-party audit organization, and it's important to have a good 3PAO, a good third-party audit organization that works well with you, they are going to put us to the rigor of ensuring that they're doing the audit that takes place before they submit to HITRUST. So we make sure that I think having the transparency, having the planning in advance, making sure that we've got great internal tools and processes, and that we are in parallel managing everything to ensure that by the time we submit, we are very predictive to what our outcome is going to be, and that works very well for us.
I'm kind of a simple guy, so I like to find analogies in my life, and I do a lot of endurance athletic events and things like that. And one of the toughest things I've ever done physically is climb Mount Rainier in Washington State. And, I liken that HITRUST engagement to be very much like climbing Mount Rainier. So, I'll train and prepare physically for that climb. I'll also train on my climbing skills and mountaineering skills and so forth. And yet while you're going through that process, you're still learning at the same time. And I think that, as Mike mentioned, that third-party assessor, they're a partner for us. Whenever I'm doing that HITRUST assessment, I have that partner in there. There's a lot of question and answer opportunity. A lot of, hey, this is this is how we implement this control. What do you think about the effectiveness of this? And there's give and take, and there's learning that happens all through the process. And I think that's really what it is it's a process. It's a growth process that happens kind of year over year as we go through those assessment experiences. So it does tend to lift the company on a recurring basis. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the HITRUST program, is that it isn't a one and done thing. You're certified once. You have an interim certification, which may not be the significant scope that your first certification would be. But then every other year, you continue to recertify on all of your controls, and you rescope. So you may have new controls that get introduced on those new years. So there's sort of this continual improvement and process improvement aspect that comes with the HITRUST certification.
Yeah, I actually love that analogy about climbing Mount Rainier. Something I've always wanted to do, by the way. Haven't done it yet. I'll get there someday. I think what happens also, just to kind of add on to what you're saying, I think you kind of blaze a path up that mountain as well. Yeah. And I had one of our technology executives just tell me last week. He said, "This is so much easier the second time around," because I think you've really laid the foundation for all that, and there's an expectation. So if you're new at it, it's going to seem very, very foreign and difficult because you're looking at everything. But I think once you go through it and you really mature your company, and as I mentioned earlier, and I think Michael validated, there's no place to hide. There are no places to hide in a HITRUST certification. It's very transparent, and then once there's no workarounds. And once you get that, your company, you are elevating your company. So I think the climbing is quite apropos to say that, because of elevation. And from that point on, I think it sets expectation of what people can expect. And you get into that continuous monitoring where no one wants it to be a fire drill next time. They don't want to be inventing while we're already in flight, so they're preparing in advance. And it really changes the culture. I think by changing the culture of the company, we also do good, externally to the communities.
Yeah. I think it also lends to secure by design. Right. So as you've gone through one or two of these certification processes, people start to think, when they're developing a new project, they start to think about, well, what are the HITRUST requirements going to be around what I'm trying to accomplish here? Right. So it starts to really, as you've said, Mike, it starts to infuse itself in the corporate culture and in the culture of design and growth.
I actually can tell you right now, I didn't mean to interrupt, Michael. Pardon me if you just give me one more. Give me for a minute. I am invited to more meetings. I say, why am I invited to these meetings over the past 6 months? It's because people want to know what do we need to take into consideration for HITRUST here? Yeah. And so that's a culture shift. And that's what I mean about this becomes a cultural shift to how your company operates. It's just some sort of, certification fire drill exercise. It really is.
Yeah, that's great. I couldn't agree more. And to comment on one of the things that Mike you mentioned, there's no place to hide. You mentioned culture shift. John, all of your comments. I think an important thing to note, as you gentlemen know, in adopting and going down the HITRUST path, you are subscribing. I want to bring it back to transparency, Sean. So you're subscribing to this idea of transparency. Not only what are you doing within your own organization, but what's going on with your business partners and your third parties, right? So this concept of no place to hide, I really like that, Mike, is, when you look at a lot of assurance mechanisms that exist out there, the way that organizations provide responses to information security questionnaires or tell their customers or their stakeholders, well, this is what I do and this is what I own. But here's all this other stuff that impacts when I'm providing you that some other service provider or vendor has their hands in on. By going down the HITRUST path, you're changing, to Mike's point, the culture to say, we own the risk. Whoever we decide to work with in order to deliver this solution from a third party and from a vendor standpoint, that's on us, right? We could certainly enter into certain business relationships from a capability standpoint, but we're not going to tell our customers that we have no responsibility from a diligence perspective in terms of who we decide to work with. I think that's really powerful. Yeah. Because one of the biggest problems we see, I think we would all agree, in the marketplace today, I was just talking to the president of AHA this morning. He said, Mike, you know what our biggest problem is in talking to 5,500 hospital systems? Vendors. 86% of the issues that they had over the last year is that there's an issue with their vendors, not them, not their own shop. So getting transparency into not only our vendors, but what are those vendors doing with their vendors is super important, right? So I think it's changing this culture of, well, we can just carve that out, or we can outsource the service, which means we outsource the risk. And Mike, I see you nodding because I know, as being a risk guy, we always the risk, right? So there's a lot of intrinsic value in adopting and following the HITRUST programs relative to that.
Yeah, we are 100% accountable for whatever we're bringing into what I call our authorizational boundary, right? For how we operate, we're accountable for that.
I think, to kind of follow up on that, really what Michael's referring to here is there is an entire domain dedicated to vendor management. So it is a significant portion of what's examined when we're assessed by a HITRUST assessor. And we need to show diligence, not just in, contracting with vendors, but also showing that we're doing the appropriate diligence with questionnaires and follow-up and managing open risks to closure. And, the other thing that I really like about HITRUST that contributes to this is the fact that, there are numerous assessors that are qualified to be HITRUST assessors, but you get the same results. It's very consistent from one assessor to another across the company or across the HITRUST certification, if you want to call it that, right? So if I have 15 vendors and they're all assessed by a different HITRUST assessor, the fact is that I have the same level of confidence in each one of those vendors.
Yeah, Sean, I know. Sorry, Mike. I know a hot topic right now is ESG, right? So when you think about again, the responsibility that organizations have, a lot of those requirements in the process of adopting HITRUST gets to some of those aspects, right? I mean, they recognize they have a responsibility around diligence in terms of what they enter into their ecosystem, what's allowed to enter into that ecosystem, as Mike alluded to before. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. No, and I actually find, as the business continuity and disaster recovery domain has grown, I mean, that it's really started to look at more social governance stuff as well that's out there. And I think I went through something just recently, one of the requirements where we have to be aware of our real estate locations of other businesses that are around us that can have an impact on our buildings. And so when you think about the expansion of the thought process there, you scratch someone new to this may say, well, what does that got to do with anything? It's outside the walls of my building. But in reality, it's looking at, the environment we operate in, and are we aware of what's happening outside the four walls of the building and the four walls of our business as well.
I think to me, as we kind of get close to the end here, I mean, I've heard it a few times now. You have nowhere to hide, and to me, if you're trying to hide, that's kind of the wrong stance. Yeah. I'd rather, and I think Mike probably speak to this from the ecosystem perspective, but I'd rather us demonstrate that we do care and that we are taking action, and we're owning and taking responsibility for the risks that we have and the exposure that we have as a collective ecosystem, right? Not just one entity in the chink of armor. So how do you see, kind of like the closing question here, how do you see your path moving forward with HITRUST, where perhaps you're able to achieve even bigger and better things now because you're not overburdened with third-party questionnaires, you're not overburdened with wrong-sized assessments, you're not over-stressed about audits that you're going to fail because you haven't taken the time. Mike, I know we had another company who had an audit come in and they said, well, we don't know how to get that scope, or we don't know how to get that information the way the auditor wants. And they then turned to the MyCSF and they're able to draw that line around that scope exactly how that auditor wanted. It turned from a dread moment to a thank goodness we'd done the work and we just needed to draw the line around the scope for this so we can move on and actually get back to doing business. So the question to Mike and John, then maybe the final word from you, Michael, at the end, what's the future hold for you, for your business, where HITRUST can help you actually achieve even bigger and better things for your business, your customers, and potentially even society?
Yeah. I'll go and go first, if that's okay. It's important to us, and I think it goes back to what we said earlier. Why, one of your first questions, why HITRUST? Because you have to, or because you want to. And we are in that place at Teledoc as we want to. And obviously there's a value to that, to our customers and to our products or our services, but most importantly to our maturity. So having a solid maturity, I call it a maturity framework, right? It's a risk and control framework. It's a maturity framework, but it covers a lot of different types of framework. You know, being able to measure and elevate our scoring and become better and better and predictive, to recycle those results in a continuous monitoring program. So building out a Kanban where it's even though we're in a 2-year cycle, we don't feel like we're starting from ground zero every 2 years, right? It is very, very systematic. As we become a FedRAMP company, which we're heading down that path, and as we look at ISO 27001 and other certifications that have a Ben overlay to that, it's capitalizing on that, but using really the HITRUST certification as the base, and then managing and monitoring that, you know, throughout that cycle to ensure that we can grow as a company, benchmark ourselves as a company, build continuous monitoring, and be very predictive in our outcomes and elevate our company to be a better, more mature company, you know, here.
I'll answer more from the consultant and leader perspective in me than just John as a CISO, right? I mean, I think all companies, as they move through the HITRUST process, I think they have that opportunity to look forward to a future where things are predictable, where things are transparent. I know that the HITRUST organization is working very hard behind the scenes to push the recognition of the HITRUST brand and the certification so that that third-party work is more easily performed. So I think organizations that really engage with HITRUST and adopt it as their framework are going to find, number one, they have a more rational approach to information security. It's spread throughout their culture, across their organization. They're not the ones that have to spearhead and kind of beat people to get involved, but the whole company adopts it. And I also think companies can see lower friction and lower barriers of entry in that vendor partner relationship. And really, to me, this sort of moves the needle for me from this is a vendor to this is a partner, because, you know, these organizations have the same level of care around security as my organization might. So I really see, you know, it's still a lot of effort, but I think from a business strategy perspective, this is really where the rubber hits the road, that it furthers our corporate strategy, it furthers our opportunities, and it reduces friction in moving forward and taking advantage of those opportunities in the future.
It's not often when you can get the strategy rubber to hit the road.
That's for sure.
That's a difficult thing to do, and if this helps with that, that's pretty mild. Michael, final thoughts from you on this. Maybe an industry-wide perspective on some trends you're seeing and across organizations taking this journey and experiencing the value of HITRUST.
Yeah, it's all about how you think, right? It's funny, back in my professional services days, we'd get people that come in with English majors and anything outside of accounting, and sometimes those were your best hires because it was all about how they thought, right? So I think as you've heard from Mike and from John and from a number of organizations, how are they thinking about this concept of transparency and protecting sensitive information to benefit the overall ecosystem? So you got to change your thought process. I think we've heard that today, right? We own it. We own it as individuals. We own it as organizations. And we owe it to society to make sure we're handling this correctly and we're doing it in the most efficient and effective way possible. So I think those are the thought leaders like John, like Mike, that you'll see emerge from other industries and try and figure out, again, what's the best way to address this and make sure that we're doing our appropriate diligence to all of our stakeholders within the community as it relates to protecting that sensitive information.
I love it. And having built or brought to market hundreds of products in my past, I know how powerful it can be to rally an organization behind something that matters, right? And the feeling that you get when you achieve what you want to achieve. And I think taking responsibility and looking at risk in the ways we talked about today matters, right? It matters to the business partners, it matters to the customers, and as you pointed out, Mike, it matters to society. We want a healthy, happy, safe society, and all this plays a role in that. So,
indeed,
I love it. Well, we are at time here. I'm sure we could all keep going with some more examples, but I want to take this moment to thank you, John and Mike, for sharing your insights with us and why HITRUST is important for you. Very different perspectives, and I'm sure many of your points resonate with different folks for different reasons. Michael, it's always great to have you on the show and good to chat with you. As you know, I'm big into risk, which is kind of nerdy, and we can talk about this forever. And I'm thankful we had this opportunity to chat about this today.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And there will be notes in the post for this, show notes, which will include some links to some of the things we talked about, certainly the I1 and the R2 and any other resources John and Mike and Michael feel would be helpful for folks to start and or continue their journey down the HITRUST framework path. So thanks everybody for listening. We'll catch you on the next Their Story.
If you enjoyed this podcast, share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. Thank you for listening.